A civil war is unfolding in Roblox of all places. Group leaders, hungry for control in a community centered around this game. A game that mirrors our own world. Ever since the birth of humanity, battles have been fought on the soils of our Earth. But as technology advances, new ages of warfare are born. From the sword to the bullet, battles are always being fought. But today, a new era is born, the digital world. A place where battles can be fought without the loss of life. And this is Virtual Campaigns. Before we even begin the story, let's set the scene. This is Roblox, a sandbox game platform where our users can create their own games. This game is essentially just a map of the Earth, where hundreds of players are placed to create civilization in this digital space. Each country that is formed has hundreds of people in them, and the leaders of these factions have almost total control over these people. So if you were to control, let's say, 90% of this world's factions, you would essentially control 90% of all of the game's players. So you can see where I'm going here. People would quickly discover this power funnel, and it wouldn't take long before they would fight for total control. One of the first factions to pop up was the Confederation of the Rhine, located in what we know as Germany. It was led by user Lavo, which I think I'm saying correctly, and this group was already in a tough position. Rival groups had threatened their rise to power. Although unorganized, they still posed a major threat. So in order to secure his power and defend off this opposition, he would enlist a group of militia, known as the Richters. This militia force was led by General Alexander, who we talked about in greater detail in a previous video. The Richter army would put down this unorganized opposition force, and essentially save the Rhine Confederation. And because of this, he would gain a lot of influence. He was seen as more of a leader than Lavo himself was. So Lavo, seeing this shift in public opinion, would exile Alexander and his militia. The Richter militia would find refuge in Spain, which at the time had no established leadership. So Alexander claimed the Iberian state, after cooing some of the local leaders. He would then officially establish the nation of Octavia. Alexander would give user Alex Parceville control of the government, so he could have his full focus on the army. Over in France, the nation of Greater Normandy, led by user William Lancaster, was scrambling to conquer the unclaimed states. And Octavia, taking this as a threat, would join the scramble and secure southern France. And it wouldn't take long before conflict would ignite. William would muster an army and gather near the town of Allemande, where they would be met by an Octavian army, led by a general named Oswald. From what we know, William and his men would be held at a hill on the outskirts of the town. Alexander and his army would push with vehicles into the town with little civilian resistance, and they would hold at a nearby church, exchanging gunfire with the Normandy army. After around 5 minutes, the Octavians would charge into the hills. After having softened them with their gunfire, William would be caught in a retreat, and his men were slaughtered. With Normandy's main army in ruins, the Octavians would set their sights on the French capital of Paris. And instead of just marching all the way up there, they would gather a small air force and fly over to the now lightly defended Paris. Octavian troops paradropped from the sky, facing a mostly civilian resistance. They would burn building after building, most notably the city hall, causing the French provinces to surrender to Octavia. Because of this extremely quick occupation, resistance was prevalent in almost every French city, and it wouldn't take long before resistance groups would pop up. After fighting with resistance militias in now occupied Paris, Alexander would imprison a small group of captured militia. Among these rebels was user Lakeland. Alexander had approached Lake with an offer to help form an anti-resistance group in return for his freedom. He agreed, and quickly began to organize a counter-resistance army, known as Legion des Volontaires France, I don't know how to say it, or just LVF for short. After Greater Normandy lost all of its territory in France, William Lancaster would rename his faction to Greater Britannia, but Alexander wasn't done with them just yet. After destroying the last pocket of British troops at the Battle of Dunkirk, he would prepare for an invasion of mainland Britannia. From sea and by air, the Richters would quickly march through British territory, meeting a large British army at the city of Dover. They would arrive by sea, completely outnumbering the British defenders. They would overrun their supply camps and eventually capture the city itself. After essentially defeating the majority of the British army, Alexander would return to France, where he met back up with the LVF. Lakeland and the LVF had been hard at work suppressing any civilian uprisings, and during this time they had grown massively, notably using forced conscription on captured rebels. They also had a very strict set of suppression tactics, killing 10 civilians for every 1 wounded LVF soldier. Alexander, having arrived in Paris, was already preparing for another war, incorporating a few LVF detachments into the main army. The Octavians would head east, towards their previous home, the Rhine. The Confederacy of the Rhine was well aware of this aggression and would form an alliance with Greater Britannia, Russia, and the United States of America to finally end this Octavian threat. Alexander and his army quickly captured the German town of Frankfurt, engaging with various coalition armies. And while this was happening, back in Paris, something was brewing behind closed doors. A synagogue proposed by an upcoming Jewish Zionist faction was greenlit by Alex Parseval, but was quickly burnt to the ground by LVF soldiers, claiming the rise of Zionism was a threat to Octavia. Parseval would round up the participants and put them on trial, but before the trial itself could even conclude, General Oswald entered a tank, drove it into the courtroom, and demanded Alex Parseval step down for interfering in military business. Paris lit up in civil war. Alex Parseval and his loyalists clashed in the streets against Oswald's Octavian army and the LVF. Fire, smoke, gunfire lit up the streets for days, until Parseval loyalists would capture and arrest Oswald. Alexander now, he had a choice. He could side with Oswald or side with Parseval. Alexander disagreed with this extreme act of terror against the Jewish synagogue, and he ordered Oswald to resign. The war against the Rhine and her allies remained at a stalemate for a while. Some battles were won, some battles lost, so Alexander needed to change something. He brought back Oswald and put him in charge of the army so he could take a break. Oswald and the army pushed pretty far into the Rhine, which alerted a neighboring nation, the Greater Alemannic Realm. This nation would enter the war, pushing them back once again. But when Alexander returned back to the army, he made progress, capturing some small towns here and there, but it was slow. The war was dragging out, and the Rhine, the Greater Alemannic Realm, and Octavia made peace. Greater Britannia had collapsed during the war, giving Octavia full control in the peace treaty, and effectively, finally, putting an end to this war. Octavian influence would spread rapidly throughout this virtual world. Factions like the United States, Korea, Prussia, they would all be couped and their governments replaced with Octavian Richterism, which was an ideology Alexander had created. And this would further secure their grip on this world. Now, of course, there's much more to this story, but I just wanted to cover this war for now. Factions like the LVF, the Rhine, and factions outside of this community, outside of this game, have stories waiting to be told. So would that be something you guys would be interested in? Should we expand on this series, this virtual campaign series of digital battles and campaigns that take place online? Is that something you guys are interested in? What do you think? This was kind of like a shorter video just to kind of test the idea. But just let me know in the comments what you guys think. And if you're new here, subscribe. Thank you guys so much. I'll see you in the next video. See ya.